Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this, our planet. My name is Andri Setoy, and this is the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies at the Western Cape. And welcome again to this, our weekly webinar on the challenges and the issues facing those surviving at the margins of capitalism in Southern Africa in the time of the coronavirus. Over the last 4 months, we have devoted our discussions mostly to documenting and understanding the social impact of the corona crisis in Southern Africa. And we focus largely on the highly unequal social impact, this unequal distributional impacts of this crisis. While those of us who belong to what Naomi Klein has called the lockdown class have been able to survive the pandemic and the regulatory response in relative safety and comfort, the reality is that the consequences for the vast majority of the people in this country have been ruinous. For most of them, an already desperate situation has become impossible. Jobs have been destroyed, incomes have lost, and hunger is the daily reality for millions. At the same time, many activists and researchers on the left have argued that this is also a time of opportunity. The corona crisis, they say, has acted like a flash of lightning or an X-ray, exposing the rank inequality of our society for all to see. And in particular, they argue it has demonstrated the dysfunctional nature of the corporate food system. The COVID-19 crisis has created an opportunity for us to push for the food system that we want and the food system that we need. More localized, more sustainable, more democratic. And over the last few months, we've used this webinar to share this debate and to charge the development of a growing collection and coalition of activists and organizations coming together to push for an agenda of food system change. Now, in a recent article, however, the journalist and social activist Boaventura Monjane wrote an interesting article for the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, in which she essentially asked, whose agenda is this really? The COVID-19 People's Coalition has brought together a wide range of social movement activists, NGO workers, middle-class volunteers, university-based academics like myself. And while they all may have good intentions, we cannot simply assume that they have the same interests at heart. And we have to take with a pinch of salt the notion that any academic or NGO commentator can speak on behalf of the poor and the marginalized. Is a very well-worn debate. It's at least as old as emancipatory politics itself. And in South Africa, we've been around this block a few times before. For example, in the debates around the history of the landless people's movement, and also the controversies surrounding various prominent members and people for Abihlale Basjolo. So we've been here before, but the debate is not going away. And hopefully we've learned a thing or three over the years. So today we hope to create a space for this discussion of alliance politics in the time of COVID-19. If NGO workers and academics cannot speak for the hungry, who can? And what is our role in this complicated environment? So to guide us into this interesting and complicated terrain, we have three seasoned, thoughtful, experienced, and articulate guests who I'm sure have plenty to say on this matter. Firstly, Constance Mogale, seasoned social movement activist, one of the founding members of the Land Access Movement of South Africa, and also currently the National Director of the Alliance for Rural Democracy. Connie, it's great to have you here. Welcome. It's good to have you on the show. Please remember to unmute yourselves when you speak, just on your screen, so that I and your guests can hear us. Secondly, also on our panel, Sta Yeni, a seasoned NGO worker, many years with the Surplus Peoples Project, thereafter National Coordinator for Chincha Makaya, currently a doctoral student at PLAS. Sta, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks, Andres. Great to be here.
It's good to have you here. And last but not least, the perpetrator of the article in question, journalist and social Boa Monjane. Boa has spent many years in the food sovereignty activism, spokesperson for La Via Campesina, currently a postdoc student here at PLAS. Boa, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And I should also say that I, of course, have a very particular positionality in this debate as well. I'm one of those university-based academics and a pale male to boot. I also have a complicated role to play here. And today I particularly want to invite my guests and the viewers to also direct questions towards us at PLAS. And how do we hold ourselves to account for our place and our role in this debate? As usual, we will take about 25 minutes for a discussion among the panelists, and then we will go to the viewers. Viewers, please feel free to check in and post your questions in the bottom of the YouTube box that you see there. We will try to answer as many of your questions as we can. I'm going to start by asking Boa to sort of set the scene for us, to take us through the key arguments of your article, and really to pose the question about who speaks for the hungry and how do the various members of these coalitions, what is the ethics and the responsibility that we have in forging these coalitions? Thank you, Boa.
Thank you, Andres, for your introductory remarks. I hope you can hear me. I'm so delighted to be in this webinar and have the opportunity to engage in this conversation about a long-standing debate, as you said, not new in South Africa. I wrote the article you mentioned for a dossier on authoritarianism and solidarity in the time of COVID-19 that was put together by the International Research Group on Authoritarianism and Counter Strategies. My intention was to show what was unfolding within the C19 People's Coalition in South Africa, to make a strong point about the political potential of the coalition, where activists were making radical demands for societal transformation. For those who are not familiar with the issue, the C19 People's Coalition emerged as a response to Ramaphosa's declaration of state of disaster that later escalated to what is today the lockdown. I was and still am participating in the coalition myself as a co-convener of the Regional Solidarity Working Group. So I had relatively good first-hand knowledge on the day-to-day dynamics of the coalition. I looked at the work of the Food Working Group, of which STAR is part and is one of the conveners, and I interviewed a number of activists, of other activists of the working group. As my article shows, there is a lot of good and progressive approaches in that work. I argue that it's probably the working group that achieved the greatest impact within the coalition. But I also identified a number of contradictions and limitations, namely that the Food Working Group, and as a matter of fact, the entire food justice movement in South Africa is deeply heterogeneous, conflictual, and divergent. That our agenda mentioned in the working group and in the documents of the working group is an assumption that certain kinds of ideas and values, as progressive as they might be, merit the acceptance of diverse and differentiated segments of civil society. That career-driven NGOs, NGO activists, urban middle-class activists, and academics occupy a rather privileged space in the food working group and in the coalition. I also said in the article that this observation is not intended at establishing hierarchies between the different sectors and segments of the coalition, but rather to question the extent to which the underprivileged and the poor sectors of the coalition appropriate the discourse and see their vision included in them. I was part of the International Secretariat of La Via Campesina, the international peasant movement, for almost 10 years. Not being a peasant myself, My task in the team were explicitly limited to technical support. La Via Campesina was, and I believe still is, very careful about making a clear distinction between technical support and political representation. I never spoke in public or for the media, for instance, or even in negotiations with various entities, but the peasants leaders themselves did. I came across cases here in South Africa and beyond. This is not a South African issue, where staff of NGOs, academics, and even donors were speaking on behalf of others. In extreme cases, they were not only speaking on behalf of others, but saying things that they were never stated by the represented groups. Here in South Africa, as you mentioned, Andres, there was the horrific situation with a social movement in KwaZulu-Natal and academics. I'm not going to enter in details about that because that case is widely known. I think we as academics or scholar activists need to exercise intellectual and political honesty. We need to know our positionality and privilege and respect other people's standing point, as suggested by Sandra Harding, or what Jamila Ribeiro in Brazil called lugar de fala. Translating this freely would mean space of speech. These concepts have permeated current discussions and debates when referring to minorities and social experiences. Essentially, it refers to the authority that a person has to speak about his or her social situation while belonging to a minority group, whether ethnic, gender, religious, political, or other. Can the subaltern speak? Asks Gayatri Spivaki. Intellectual and political honesty is being able to let people speak for themselves, I believe. How can then academics and NGOs or donors work with movements and activists in a horizontal and respectful way? How can we be organic intellectual without grabbing spaces? Boaventura de Sousa Santos, a Portuguese scholar based in Coimbra, suggests something that seems to me very interesting, which is to be a rearguard intellectual. That is, to go or walk behind the movements and never the other way around. This is a way of subverting intellectual vanguardism, terribly problematic. I will leave it there, Andres, and from other colleagues in the panel. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Boa, for that introduction. I would like to take the discussion then directly to Connie as a social movement activist. Connie, you've been around in the movement for ages, and you've encountered these debates before. Here we are again. I'd very much like to hear your take, just firstly on the general issues that Boa has put on the table as regards the positional power of activists and the tendency of people to speak for others, and also just how do you see it playing out in the People's Coalition at the moment during this pandemic? Connie? And also to get to unmute yourself before you speak. Connie, please.
Yeah, thank you, Andres, and thank you, Boa, for that very inspiring piece of article. But I just wanted to, I will start with the general issues. I think some spaces where there's power dynamics, like the academics getting into it and the career-driven NGOs are not safe. We feel like it are not safe spaces for ordinary activists to participate in. Unintentionally so, one feels overwhelmed in those spaces, dominated, and not a safe space for you to participate in. But I tend to agree mostly with what Boa is raising on those issues. But on NGOs which are registered are dominating those informal social movements which are not recognized, and it is not intentional, and it's not a problem of exclusion or whatever, but it's a I think the problem is structural, it's systematic. Participation in those is limited to those who have resources and who have the knowledge and power. So I also wanted to comment on what has to be done to achieve the food justice movement. Boa is articulating many issues, but he missed out the point on food justice without land tenure. It's problematic. It may not even be achievable. So for me to hesitate to participate in those kind of forums is to be scared to be distracted, because we will be talking about food justice, we'll be talking about food parcels, we'll be talking about everybody's point of view is in the mix, and you become diverted from your political goal. So I felt like the C19 structure as a whole didn't focus much more on driving our political project, which is getting land to the people, recognizing customary land for those small-scale farmers who are in the communal land. Also, I think also we miss each other because of the definitions that are so different, even if depending on the context. So terminologies like small, like peasants, like whatever, are easily hijacked and appropriated and missing the target. And that is why, as social science, we need to create our own spaces. And I want to congratulate Tsimani for having started that initiative, because even if we can criticize too much what the NGOs are doing, what C19 is doing, but we will be without somebody initiating something, there will never be anything. So it is courageous for people to start something, even if we will come back and criticize and say it's not really for local spaces. And I think to achieve political recognition, we first have to emancipate ourselves as ordinary people. Even those peasants we're talking about, the rural small-scale farmers, the poor, we really need to change the mindset of people to firstly emancipate themselves from seeking recognition of people who never wanted to recognize them in the first place. So we need to equip ourselves with knowledge, skills, and other things. The other thing is we should not strive to compete to be like COSATU or other unions. We should just work ourselves. We should practice what we do, what we preach. Most of the agroecology movement, NGOs who are leading the narratives, we are good at speaking but not doing things. And if we're not doing things, we're not gonna emancipate anybody. We are not going to achieve this movement. Also, if we look at them, so if we take trending things like Brazil, what social movements are doing in Nepal, in other countries, we can learn from the experiences, but we must know that situations are unique. Things are different. Experience differs from one place to another, and we should just, I think, to localize narratives and to localize production should be our first thing, because now the formations like C19 are done in a spontaneous way, responding to crisis, and that is understood. Somebody was supposed to do something, but if we have listened to voices of people from long ago when they were saying we need sovereignty, we need to be able to produce where we are, we need to be able to feed ourselves, we wouldn't have been in this situation where we have to come spontaneous with informations and then we start asking ourselves who's speaking on behalf of who, because we knew that that was the case. And that's why I want to speak from an I don't want to be seen to be representing any marginalized groups, because we are not homogeneous. And you are rightly when we say C19 was heterogeneous, because people come with different ideas and they are not clicking. And I think for us to assume that they were supposed to be homogeneous would be missing the point. I think that that diverging views, it is what would build the movement, what we have to build. So I think for me, the challenges of NGOs will never, of NGOs leading movements will never, I mean, criticizing it robustly, it would be self-defeat somehow, because we know that even social movements who wanted to build their, respond to their challenges and build their agenda, because of the requirements of having to have registered as an NPO or NGO, having to have human resources and financial resources to drive their agenda, having to have to comply with statutory requirements, and also having to, I was an activist myself. I didn't know how to manage human resources staff and financial things, reading financial reports. But as an NGO leader, you find yourself having to know all those things. And now it takes you away from your on-the-ground work that you are doing. And I think we really need to, it's an opportunity for us to call for an alternative way of recognizing initiatives from people without NGOizing them, without them having to be an NGO. So, if you look at the power dynamics within the sector, whether you come from academic or you are an activist, even if you are in a meeting with the civil society, because also I have a problem with these terms of civil society, because every time when government has spoken to some NGO, they would claim that they have consulted the civil society. But who is the civil society really? And we need to start unbundling that terminology to make sure that we reach to that household, to that mama who's planting behind his in his backyard, that making an impact, you understand, making a contribution to the economy and subsidizing what government couldn't have reached. So that is what my problem is about the terminologies and the way it's used. But I think the challenges of NGOs, we shouldn't too much institutionalize things when we want to build a food justice movement. We should take people as individuals. And we know that even if in an institution, even if you can have a policy which says we need to respect the marginalized, we need to emancipate the rural voices, we need to make sure that voices from below are heard. It depends on the attitude of a person. It depends on a person, the individual. It doesn't depend on the institution, because the institution's policy could say something, but the individual could do something else. So I think for us to build the social movements, we need to come up with a niche. The way we have been building social movements, we failed. And you are correctly saying, though there is no agrarian movement today, which can be, challenging in the paradigm. But maybe we should change the way we organize, because the way we have done things in the 90s, we still want to do them now, starting the national forum and then wanting to see the appropriate and bring some few voices from below, and it's not gonna work. So we need to really sit down and say, what have we done wrong? Where are we going wrong? Without comparing ourselves to the labor unions and whatever, but coming up with something that will work for us and concentrating on ourselves internally so that the outside world can recognize us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie. And I think that emphasis on having to rethink strategies and not trying to repeat the strategies of popular organization in the past is one that we really need to take. I'm going to put the focus now. Star, you yourself have a long experience in this, and you're also at the moment somewhat struggling the world of NGOs and academia. part social activists, past doctoral students. How do you see the situation, and how do you navigate the complexities of these forms of alliance politics? I'll let you put your position, and then we'll start taking questions from our viewers. So please, viewers, don't be shy. If you have comments or questions, join the conversation, and we will respond as best we can.
All right. Thanks, Andres, and thanks, Bo and Connie. My points really are quick, and they link in quite nicely with my two colleagues. I think before we can even talk about the politics of the coalitions and the NGOs and activists in the coalitions and academics, I think it's important to first understand the NGOs and movement outside of coalitions, because they're going to coalitions bringing with them their tactics, their strategies, their style, their relationships. These are not built inside the coalition. We come with them into the coalitions. First point that I want to make is around the relationship between NGOs and movements, which is based on very unequal power relations. So, for example, mostly NGOs see movements or activists as beneficiaries, and they use those concepts. In some NGOs, they are called beneficiaries. So the NGO is a benefactor, the activists are beneficiaries, and that's got implications for a lot of things. Of course, the intentions are always good. In some NGOs, they are called movements. In some, they are called constituencies. In some, they are called community partners. In some, these terms are used interchangeably. But ultimately, the power relations aren't equal between the benefactor and the beneficiaries. The other one comes with resources and power, and the others don't have those kinds of resources that they need. So that's one point that I would like us to keep in mind when we think about these relationships in the coalitions. The second point is about hierarchies within NGOs themselves. NGOs don't really necessarily have flat structures. There are different hierarchies, and the division of labor is structured along those hierarchies. For example, often the director or those in management are the ones who are in contact with the funders, are the ones who are head of strategies, are the ones who take decisions. They're the ones who decide which academic to partner with, which institution, which university to work with, and which not. These often are decisions made at the highest level of the NGO. And then at the bottom, you have what is often called field workers, or but the people who are in regular contact with the movements. So those are the people who would often get in the NGO vehicle, drive to the village or wherever, spend a few days, have workshop meetings, whatever you call it, with the activists, and back to the office. So in a way, those would then be the people who bring whatever is happening, we call it on the ground, into the office, and then it filters into the management. And of course, even in that process, a lot gets lost, right? Some NGOs will differ. Some have those in the middle, the managers, but there are those hierarchies, and those hierarchies also shape how the NGO relate with the activists, how the staff inside the NGOs relate with the activists. And then the third component of these relationships is an invisible yet very powerful partner, the funders, the donors. They are so influential. Yes, NGOs do have some level of autonomy, but funders are so influential. And remember, always, the intentions are always good. The intentions are always good, but the funders have this particular, they shape how the NGO goes. They shape the approach, the tactics, they shape the priorities, they shape the focus. This comes maybe in the form of a funding proposal, calls for maybe the focus is climate change. Of course, climate change is a serious issue, no doubt about that. But maybe when the funder is calling for proposal for climate change, the movement that the NGO works with is not focusing on climate change; it's focusing on other issues. Now already you have those kinds of tensions and who must compromise, and often it's the NGO would go with what the funders say the focus should be, because in reality we need money to run the NGOs. We need money to do the work that we do, which I think is also important. But there are those challenges. I want to make an example about how funders shape tactics and approaches of movement indirectly through NGOs, and how this can be problematic. I remember many years ago, we worked with small-scale farmers who were constantly fighting fighting the municipality against livestock impounding. And farmers were then saying, you know what, we are so tired of this, because these municipalities are not giving us community land for grazing. Every time our livestock is impounded, what we're going to do moving forward, we're going to occupy municipal land and put our livestock. And this was gaining a lot of momentum amongst the farmers, that we're going to occupy municipal land, put our goats, put our sheep, nobody's going to move us. We're tired of these tedious processes that are not taking us anywhere. Now, that concept of land occupations made it to the funding proposal, because you have to provide the context, do a concept note and all of that. It made it to the proposal, sent to the funder. The funder looks at the proposal, comes back, everything is well, except one thing that's underlined is land occupations. The funder says, we're not really comfortable with this kind of approach. We prefer more kind of softer approaches. Now, these funders often are in Europe. These funders often are in Europe, and they are white, and they've got their own understanding of what is happening here based on their own positionality. So in their own understanding of what's happening here and how it should be solved is very much based on their own understanding and their own positionality. So for them, it's dialogues. Let's have conversations with the municipality. Don't attack. Let's not be confrontational. And then now, when you delete the word, when you delete the word land occupation, you have to replace it with something that the funder wants. And in that process, you are now compromising. You are depoliticizing the agency of the movement, because now you are, in a way, you are forcing people to abandon their confrontational approaches and go for softer tactics. So these are some of the challenges and contradictions within NGOs and movements. So now, when you go into coalitions, these play out in that particular way. When you go into coalitions, which is why Boa and Conway are saying people who dominate who've been dominating this question are NGOs, but not just anyone in NGOs. It's those who are in higher positions of NGOs, often the directors, the ones who are in contact with funders, who are in contact with academics. Those are the people who then, because of the structure and how their work is structured, end up being the ones who are pushing for these dialogues, which are very limiting and limited. Maybe to close, NGOs have a very important role. I don't want to downplay that. They do have an important role to play. Professor Issa Shivji suggests that instead of having these small policy dialogues here and there, once-off events where we have everyone, the multi-stakeholder kind of approaches, which are very limiting to movements, NGOs should be actually pushing for more spaces for political participation, where movements will speak for themselves. But we need more of those spaces, not just once-off events. It's an ongoing kind of work, and that's what I think we should put our energies in. Thanks.
Thank you, Star. You really brought home some of the real complexities of the real politic of NGOs and the different leverage and the different sources of power different role players have. I see a comment here from Henk Smith observing that only those who have access to data with a computer or smartphone could engage in discussions and decision-making processes. And we see this even here in this webinar, where we are all differentially positioned, and we have different ability to influence this discussion. I'm very interested in thinking specifically about the question about, and maybe this is my, what is the role of academia and researchers in this position? Ben Cousins, previous director of PLAS, previous Saatchi chair, asked the question, what way is knowledge a source of power? And I always want to add, whose knowledge and what counts as knowledge is, what is the specific privilege of academic knowledge and academic forms of analysis, and how can we create a space for other forms of more embodied and practical knowledge that might be at the disposal of non-academic members of these coalitions? I don't know which of you want to take this, but I'm very interested, maybe because I want to know where I fit into all of this. How do you see the specific role of academia, scholarship, researchers, analytical discourse in this? Who wants to go first?
I can try to react to that question, and thanks, Ben, for the question. I think this is a very deep question and very uneasy to answer. But definitely those who have knowledge, those who have the knowledge that is perceived to be important, such as academics, have a privilege, right? Because they have legitimacy, and they're able to occupy spaces that other people are likely not to occupy. But I wanted to extend this issue to a different level, which is what Andre said. Whose knowledge is it? I mean, there is a big debate within social movements about some of awful tendencies of academics that extract knowledge from informants. In our field, could be peasants or farmers, but it could be women, or it could be whatever sector it is, and then appropriate that knowledge, right? So that relationship can also be problematic, and this take us to another question: how we as academics are able to recognize, right, those who, or those from who we acquired what we then claim to be our knowledge when we sign articles, when we sign reports, when we sign books. And I think here the issue of intellectual or knowledge extractivism is important. So I think we as academics should, in one way or another, try to reduce that gap between the knowledge we claim to be ours and the knowledge that we acquire from social struggles and from people.
Mm. Yeah. So for me, I think, I think knowledge is power. You to know who you deal with. You need to know your opponents. You need to know the policy environment you are operating in, and you need to know the entry and the exit points. Most of it is knowledge empowers you to know and to gauge your capacity to deal with the challenge. And if you're facing the challenge, if you know the intensity of the challenge you are facing, you will then know who to speak to. You will then know who could be your ally, who could be your inhibitor. So you need to know. So I think as activists, we must really not get tired of knowing. And knowledge is not just about reading books, because books are written by people with their own agenda, trying to project a certain message for certain reasons, but also knowledge of your space and where you want to go. So most of the times we want to refer to other people and point the finger far away from us, and not taking time to know your environment, your space, your community, the people you are living, so that you know do strategy and tactics, which line to take. So I think for me, knowledge is power, and not only knowledge that we find in institutions, but also informal and informal institutions. So institutions or customer institutions, they are very, very important. So if you go to a certain community, you need to know who your audience, these people are the people of this a certain practice, whether it's religious or customary. And if I want to build friendship with these people, this is I should approach them. So that is my take, and I think we have underestimated local knowledge, and like Boy is saying, most of the times when it's important, it is being appropriated and taken away from the original people who their intellectual property is being appropriated every time. So
thank you, Connie. Star, I would like to turn the spotlight onto you now quickly, because although you've spoken eloquently about the complexities of NGO life, I would also like to hear how you think about your role as an academic. You are now a doctoral student. You are now entering into a whole different different structures of power and knowledge by entering this intellectual apprenticeship. Obviously, you're doing this because you want the knowledge to be useful and effective in the world out there. But how do you negotiate your specific role as you move between the different worlds of academia and the world of social activism and so on?
Okay, thanks. I do think there is space for engaged scholarship. Boa earlier on spoke about scholar activists. So there are academics who are based at universities, but there are also academics who are based in movements, and I think they all have a very particular role that they can play. I think for me, what's important is the knowledge production has to be in dialogue with the movements. It should not be imposed, which sometimes is the case, not always. It sometimes is the case, and I think it again often determined where the academic is based. We work with academics who are at the University Plus, for example, a lot, but also work with academics who are not in I can just think of people like Fanny, who's an academic but based in a movement. Inyanda, people like Stephen, who is an academic but based in an NGO, and the dynamics there are quite, in a way, different because of location. So for me, the main thing is that the scholarship has to be in conversation, has to be in dialogue with the movement, and not the other way around.
Thank you, Star. A very interesting question comes from Bandile Ngedi. And in a way, one of the things that all of you have stressed is the crucial role of funding as one of the kinds of resources that people deploy here. And indeed, the access of NGOs and also their beholdenness to donor agendas is a source of problems. So is there a way out of this fly bottle? If of unequal, what space is there for ground movements to raise their own funding and be thus freer to push their own agendas? And what have your experiences been over the last 10, 15 years? And I think particularly, Connie, and had plenty of experience of trying to negotiate this complex environment. To what extent are you dependent on external donor funding? Is it possible to become free of that dependence? And what can we do, or what can you do? Here I go saying we again. What can you do to push back against the attempts of donors to set the agenda, to projectize your struggles and so on? Connie, I'll ask you to go first.
Yeah. So it is possible for movements and people to generate self-funding. And I think it is just a way of changing people's mindset. We know you can't do mass mobilization without proper funding. But what we have done over time is to have allies within the academic space, within the NGO space, and the people. So we need to make sure that academics that we befriend can bridge for us, because people who are making decisions, whether in government, whether in funding institutions, they are mostly academic and they understand that language. So we need that. That is why I said maybe we should refrain from trying to work with institutions more, but to work with individuals in good faith, and make sure that they use their power and privilege to bridge without gripping the space, like Boa has said earlier. But they can bridge and be our advocate and our representative where we are not able to. But people's organizations, will need people's contribution as well. And if you look at the sort of informal social spaces, there are people who are contributing for burials, they form stock fairs, they also go to church. Like if you look at Easter holidays, for example, people go in groups to Devon to enjoy themselves. Some of them go to mess of people, they go to churches. Nobody's funding those things. Nobody's giving them money to go to Moria for 4 days and when. And we need to change people's mindset to know that if we're gonna change this the structures and the system, we need to have our own, trust our own self. We need to make our own self contribution. And if people start, I don't think government would love that, because that is why when they see people initiating things and building nice houses for themselves, they go dismantle it, because they don't like it. They like people who are dependent, who are always requesting things from them, and so that they can see them as this messiah who are saving the day. And same thing with the funders. We shouldn't let funders dictate our agenda. They should fit into the puzzle in the plan that we have. If they don't fit into the puzzle, I know it's not nice for me to say it, and I might be risking my organization's well-being right now. But I mean, if they don't fit into the puzzle, let them go, because they have to fit into your puzzle, into the agenda. Or otherwise, we're going to be depending on people, on outside sources, and that is what is defeating the people's movement. That is what is defeating the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Star, your view. What is the space for becoming independent of the donor-driven agenda, either by finding your own sources of funding or by finding ways of pushing back against it?
I don't know. It's quite tricky. Ideally, yes, it would be great if movements could fund themselves. But I think because it has been difficult in my experience for movements to fundraise and to get funds. So there's a lot of dependence on donors. So the question is, how then do NGOs push back at donors? I know some have said that they would have those kinds of conversations to say, no, but actually you can't make us now choose a side here. We are supporting movements, but if you are now pushing us in that direction, you are making us now be neutral, and I don't think we want to be neutral. So I don't think there's one answer or one strategy to this funding issue. I think there's we can explore multiple strategies. One being if movements can source funding locally where they can have more autonomy, but also if NGOs could also, in a way, push for some level of autonomy where they don't have to compromise things that are so fundamental to movements, like their tactics and their approaches, which those should not be touched. Yeah, I don't think there's a simple straight answer, or rather, I don't have a straight answer to that question.
Thank you, Star. A very interesting question from Fikile Vilakazi asking, do identity politics enable or inhibit coalition organization? Could it be that we've reached a place of classless coalition organizing? I would take the central point of Boa's article to be that we haven't, and that class and differential access to power matter. But at the same time, I'm quite struck by the degree of agreement that we have managed to construct in our discussion so far. Is there actually anything that the four of us will disagree on? And just think about the differential position that we have here. I'm a tenured university professor. Boa is sort of on the fringes of having an insecure existence as a person. You're also straddling these worlds. We're all in very, very different positions. Where are the places we've been agree, but where are the places where we might find ourselves pushing in different directions and finding ourselves needing to come to new understandings? Or are we really have we already got such good and pure intentions that agreement is always going to be forthcoming? Boy, you haven't said a lot for a while, so I'm going to throw that one at you.
I think a classless society is what we are fighting for. If we if we had a classless society, I think we could consider ourselves victorious. I mean, I think that being from different backgrounds, being from different spaces and having different privileges should not halt the possibility of us coming together and build a collective process. I think what is problematic is to use our privilege or our position or our class or our race or our agenda to silence others or oppress others or impose our own views to others. I think we have to build coalitions that apply democracy in real terms, where we actually listen to the voices of the minority, or listen to all voices and take into account all opinions, and as I said, exercise intellectual and political honesty, which I think that's what is lacking in many collective processes, not only in South Africa but almost everywhere. In terms of how I'm going back very briefly to the previous question on funding. Of course, funding and money determine how movements operate, how they relate to other movements or other actors, and how their internal organicity is shaped. But I mean, I think trade unions have a different financial strategy here, also because they have the privilege of being employed, right? Wage labor, and they can contribute from their salaries to the trade union. That's very much different for the case of unemployed people or landless people or poor marginalized people. And then I guess that funders or donors should play simply the role of supporting the struggles, but without determining or deciding what political agenda should be taken forward. And here I'm going to say something that might sound very, very problematic. I think at the same time as revolutions won't be televised, I think real struggles actually can self-fund themselves, either in financial means or other resources. I don't believe that real struggles and movements are entirely dependent on money to function and to exist.
Thank you. We are nearing the end of our hour here. Ster and Connie, do you have any final words and just thoughts about also how we're going to, in a way, what we've seen here is that the politics and the C19 People's Coalition has been a time of people coming together in response to the crisis. Also, fundamental questions of strategy coming up. What do you see the most important questions and challenges facing the movement that you are part of, and the struggle for a more democratic food system in South Africa? I'm going to go to Ster, and then Connie, will you have the last word?
Okay. I think we do have a crisis of tactics, a crisis of strategy, and I think maybe that's where we really need to do some reflections and rethink our strategies and our approaches. I'm reminded of one time there was a year where we were supporting a lot of protests on the farms, on the farms, and it was almost every week there was a protest, marching to the municipality, marching to this office. And one evening, the activists were busy making placards, and one comrade said, "She's tired. She wants to go and sleep now. She's done her placards." And others said, "No, but you still need to do the memorandum that you need to give to the municipal manager." And she said, let's give him the one from the last month, because it's the same issues." And everyone laughed, and others said, "In fact, let's check if they still have the one we sent them last month, because every time we march, we submit a memorandum." We were laughing, but the point that the woman was making is actually we need to think about other strategies. We've been sending these memorandums day in and day out, year in and year out, and nothing seems to change. And I do think, in a way, we are a bit stuck in terms of tactics, and I think we need some creativity and innovations there. And this cuts across, in my view, movements, NGOs, and even academics in how we think change is going to come around. Thanks.
Thank you, Ster. Those are very sobering words. Connie, your thoughts, and you started off this discussion saying we need to think again about what strategies work. What do you think are some of the potential strategies that we need to think in the future, and where do you think the room for possible victories in the future lies?
Yeah,
I'm asking you the really difficult question.
It is a difficult question, but thank you very much for allowing me to make a closing statement. What I think what we should do is to harvest on the good things that came out on coalitions and movement building over years, but also take lessons on where do we have to go wrong. For me, this period of COVID-19 presents an opportunity for us to radically change the policy paradigm in favor of ordinary people. We have seen that ordinary people have been resilient and have been feeding themselves during this COVID-19. We know that Solidarity Fund has done up to so far, but it doesn't reach every corner of the country. But people are surviving. And how? So I think we should go back and listen more to involve and listen more to how people are surviving, what is their strategy, and make sure that we document and acknowledge the source of information, document best practices, and move forward. For me, I think another word is possible, and I think, yes, the food justice movement is possible. We just have to revise and revisit how we do things. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Those are inspiring words. Another world is possible. No condition is permanent. And I'm very struck by the fact that for the last few years, it's become increasingly evident that the relatively stable geopolitical environment that allowed a kind of alliance between wealthy northern donors, human rights activists in the global south, a sort of a general project of, call it neoliberal developmentalism, that that world is changing, and we're entering currently into a much more conflictual, a much more unstable, a much more uncertain world. And even if we don't change our strategies, the world in which we act is changing around us. And it is very clear that only those who are active and flexible and take the main chance are going to be able to have this impact. So let's continue this discussion. It has been very illuminating, and I will note that I'm quite relieved that none of you tried to put me on the spot about where I stand and where we as PLAS stand. We as PLAS, I put Muniba Isaacs's comment about the role of PLAS. We are a well-funded organization. We've been in the business for 25 years. And I think these questions are questions that we at PLAS also have to ask ourselves. What is we're doing in this process? What is our role? So I hope this is just the beginning of this continuing discussion. Thank you very much for being here. Listeners, thanks very much for your comments. The comment box has really been buzzing. I'm sorry I couldn't put more of your comment and field more of your questions, but it's clearly been a very stimulating debate. Thank you very much, colleagues. We will tune in next week, hopefully, with a discussion hosted by my colleagues Pilani Zamchia and Farai Mtero, who will be taking us into discussion of the burgeoning and distressing political crisis in Zimbabwe. That promises to be very interesting as well. Until then, be well, have courage, stay safe, and stay healthy. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.